Here we go. Hi, we're here today, or I'm here today with Rich Sims from Cabrillo College in Aptos, California. Cabrillo is a community college that serves students very similar to the ones attending CSU Pueblo. He's taught for 11 years as a second career, and 9 of those 11 years have been exclusively online. Rich, thank you so much for spending time with me today.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Can you share a little bit about your background with us, please?
Yeah, sure. I'm living in California now, but I actually grew up in Michigan, and I went to the University of Michigan and got my bachelor's degree there in computer science, and then I also got my master's degree there too in computer engineering. So after that, I worked for HP for almost 27 years, a little bit more than 27 years, going on 28, and then retired from HP, took early retirement, and I live in the Monterey Bay area. We have a college here called Cabrillo College, and I'd always wanted to take courses there when I was working at HP. But when I was at HP, it gets so busy you could never concentrate on the courses. So I just couldn't do it. So I just started after I retired. I took every CIS course. Those are like the IT courses they had at Cabrillo. I took all the Windows and Linux and networking courses, Spanish, digital web design, everything I could take. Turned out my Linux instructor wanted to go off for a year on sabbatical, and he asked me if I'd teach his class while he was gone. I said, "You got to be kidding. I don't know how to teach." But that's how I jumped in. So that was back in 2008. And as Denise has been saying, we teach kind of a mixed mode at Cabrillo, the ones of us who do teach online. So I teach a classroom that's got some live students and some remote students, and some students that will watch the recordings, those who work and can't come in at a certain time. So that's what I've been doing for the last, actually 11 years now. And I actually retired last term. So I'm retired now.
Well, the model you described is something that's just been formalized in the last, I don't know, maybe 8-10 years, called the hybrid flexible or Hyflex model. And that's a model where an instructor is live in class. They have students with them. They also have students attending via Zoom, and they have students who complete work asynchronously. So Rich is going to share some of his design and teaching strategies for the course to help us understand how he made a Hyflex model more manageable. So Rich, what did you think about design-wise when you were creating the course structure so that you could support student success? And what did you know about your student population before you started designing, and how did that influence the design of the course?
Sure. Well, when I started taking all those courses at Cabrillo College after I retired from HP, I had some really good instructors, and I got to see a lot of best practices firsthand. And I could tell, from what I was seeing, what made courses really fun and enjoyable. And I ended up not inventing any of them, but taking all the best, just cherry pick the best practices from all those teachers. When I started taking over Jim's courses, Jim Griffin is the one who designed all the Linux courses. And when I took over his course, I took all the best practices from the other classes I'd taken and used those. Cabrillo is a community college, so we have students right out of high school. We have students that are in the workforce and are coming back to learn new skills. We have every type of student you could think of. So we've got, in the computer classes, I teach the computer classes, the Linux course, I would have people who were actually in high school taking college courses, all the way up to people who were retired and wanted to learn, like myself, computing as a hobby, and everything in between. So the best practices that I picked up on were actually a lot of them from, let me tell you some of them. I'll tell you some of the ones I really liked. When I took the web design classes, there was an instructor named John Gofsky, and he had these first-minute quizzes. And you go like, first-minute quiz? Yeah, I got to take a quiz the very first minute of class? John, why are you doing that? And he said, he says, people always come into class 5 minutes late, 10 minutes late, 20 minutes late. And I kind of repeat everything over and over again for like the first half an hour. So what I do is I publish the questions. There's only 3 questions, and they're published a week in advance. Everybody knows what the questions are. All you have to do is come to class on time and give the answers to the 3 questions that you can work with your classmates on the answers to. And then we start class. And there's something about having that 2 easy points that gets everybody through the classroom on time. So I definitely adopted that one, and that has always served me well. I had to tune it though when I went online, because John's class wasn't online. You'd write down the answers on a piece of paper, hand it in. So I used email. People would just email me the answers. But then I had students that worked, and I said, this isn't going to work because they're not going to be there during the first minute of class. So I'll tell you how I handled that one later, but it has to do with extra credit. I had a very liberal extra credit policy. People could, if they couldn't do one thing, they could do something else. So I used John's first minute quizzes. He also uses the point grading system. This was different than when I went to college, where you get an A on one test and a B on this lab, and you average it all together. This one's worth 50%, and this one's weighted. John's was really simple. It's just points. You get 30 points for a lab, you get 20 points on a test or a quiz, you get 5 points for a forum post, and no matter the number of points you get determines your grade. So if you got all your points doing things you really liked, you could get a really high grade in class. So I used that. He had an online forum. I also used that too. So students could help each other. So when you're working on a computer lab and you're stuck, and it's guaranteed, if you're taking a course like the ones that we teach on Linux, when you're doing the lab, you'll get stuck. You'll type something and you'll make one little mistake, and weird error messages will come out, and you'll go like, how am I supposed to figure this out? And so the online forum means you can go on the online forum and say, hey, I'm on step 2 of the lab 2, and I'm getting this weird error message. Anybody else see this? And students could work with each other and help each other. And then I could chime in as the instructor too. I'd get notified whenever there's a new post, and I could jump in and say, oh, here's what you need to do. So I use that. He also had this idea of a transparent grade book. Let me show you what that looks like. I'm going to share. This is the grading page for the course, and this is what the students see. So everybody gets a code name. You don't know who's who, but you can see how you're doing in the course. You can see, oh, here's the quizzes, 3 points on a quiz. Here's the tests. Here's the forum posts. Here's the labs. Here's the project. Here's extra credit. And you can kind of see how you're doing in the course compared to other people. And you can say, oh, and other people are getting this. I might need to do some more work. I really like this when I was in courses with these open grading books. I felt it was really helpful. So I used that too. So that was another thing. What else? Oh, there was, let me stop sharing here. In the computer courses, there's different ways to teach a computer course. The Linux instructor would basically work things out on a live keyboard that everybody could see, and you could follow along. But what would happen, because it's a computer course, is you type the wrong thing. And all of a sudden, whatever you're doing doesn't match what the instructor's doing. And so what would happen is the instructor would keep going, but you go, no, I'm going to figure this out. And then you finally figure it out, and then you look up and you go like, wow, the instructor's talking about something else now, and I have no idea what he has said for the last 5 minutes. So what I did is I put everything into a set of, there were PowerPoint slides. So it'd be all the lecture materials and all the hands-on activities would all be available at the beginning of class. You could download it and look at it, but you could scroll forward and backwards. So if you did get totally carried away on an activity, and then you wanted to see what the instructor had moved on to, you could just move ahead in the slides and see what you'd missed. So I used that technique. So I'd always have PowerPoints that were available for the class. And I don't know, that's some of the things. Those are some of the things. I think it's critical too, if you're teaching online, you've got to have a website. And we have Canvas as a learning management system. And for those of us instructors that could build our own websites, we would tend to put everything on our website and have Canvas linked to our websites. And the reason is for IT classes, after you take the class, you might get a promotion, you might go get a new job, and then you're going to get an assignment on the job, and you're going to go like, Rich taught us that. That was like in lesson 2. If it's on Canvas, it's gone. You don't have access anymore. But if it's on the instructor's website, which is permanent, you can go back, and I can go back to previous terms, say, oh, I took CS 90 in the fall of 2017, and I can go back and it's lesson 2. I can click on the lab, or I want to go look at the lab again because this is what my boss is asking me to do, exactly what we did in this lab. So everything's there forever, or at least as long as my website is still being published. Now I better share that because you can't see it. Sorry about that. So here I have all the old courses. So you could go back if you were like in fall of 2017, you wanted to look at the CS 90 class. There's all the materials for the class, and you could always go back and look at a lab and see how you did things. So yeah, those are some of the best practices. There's a lot of other ones too, but those are some of the main ones. So I'll turn it back over to you, Denise.
Now, in your model, which is the Hyflex model, students have multiple pathways for course completion. They don't only have to come to class or only work online. Can you tell me how you created your instruction and assessment without creating 2 exact copies of the course, so that you didn't have to create a face-to-face course and then an online course? You just had one course.
Yeah, that would have been way too much work. So what I did was I taught the courses just the old-fashioned way, face-to-face, for the first 2 years, and then that's when the networking instructor Rick started using it was called CCC Confer. In California, it was like Zoom, but before Zoom came out, it was around WebEx times. And so basically what you do is you can't use the whiteboard or the blackboard in the classroom. You have to use everything that's that everybody can see. So I would create these PowerPoint slides. Let me show you for the class, whether they were online or not. Let's see here. So this is the website, and if you wanted to look at the PowerPoints for a class, you go to here's lesson 7. Okay, you download those slides. So instead of using the whiteboard, and markers that you'd mark on a whiteboard, I would use these PowerPoints. And because you don't want death by PowerPoint, where you have people dying because your PowerPoint decks are so long, what I would do is I do lecture for. This is all like I made a lot of notes to myself. This is Confer, it's like Zoom, but I wanted to make sure I had everything set before I started class. So these are like notes to myself. And here's where we'd start the class. And I used these mugshot of my class so people could see each other, what they look like. Because sometimes when you're not when you're not in a classroom, you can't actually see the other people in the class. It was nice to be able to see everybody's faces when you came to class. So I always have this up when we started the class. But what I do is I would teach from these slides. Here we're talking about a test. And what I do is I break up the lecture with these activities. And it didn't matter whether you were in the classroom or if you were online or if you were watching the recordings, it would be the same thing. So everybody would see these slides. We'd have these activities that everybody would do. And one thing I would insist upon is that everybody get onto the web conferencing tool like Zoom or Confer. So you wouldn't have the people in the classroom depending on a projection on a whiteboard or a screen. Everybody would be looking at the same thing. And so we would lecture a little bit, okay, and then we would do some practice. So everything with the wood grain slides would be practice, where we would actually do things. It'd be hands-on exercises. Because if you didn't have these hands-on exercises, people would die from too much PowerPoint. So you do a little bit of PowerPoint just to explain what it was, that the next bit of knowledge that you were teaching, and then we do hands-on practice. We'd actually do it. And so that worked out really well because the people in the classroom, and actually it's really good to have people in the classroom as well as remote. One of the things you can do when you're teaching totally remote, it's harder to gauge people's expressions. Like Zoom has the I'm confused, go faster, go slower.
Right.
But if you see a puzzled look on a person in the class, what you just said didn't make any sense. You might want to back up and go over it again. But that's the way you teach. And then the folks that worked who couldn't attend class, they would go through, you would record everything, Confer and Zoom, let you record the video of the class. They'd go through it. Now, to me, that would be the hardest. I've always thought that the synchronous model is really good for people who actually can attend some of the classes, if not all of the classes. But the difference would be if you're watching our classes are once a week. So it might be a 3-hour class.
Right.
Some classes were actually 4 hours long. That's a lot of video to watch, even if it's broken up with activities. So the asynchronous model, it does take more structure and more work, but I think it's a little bit better for those asynchronous settings. Although, if you've taken those classes yourself, you know that you can get highly distracted after a while. You when you don't have the instructor talking to you, or you can't in real time ask the instructor a question, or the other students, do a presentation. It's different than when you're just looking at the computer screen. But this is how we do it, and I felt this model was a good mix, and it let you just have one course for both online and for the folks in the room.
Did you have a good balance of students attending face-to-face and online and asynchronously, or did you see one preference over another?
Sometimes when I had a class that would start in the middle of the day, I'd have more people that would come in. But when I had classes that were at rush hour here on the West Coast, and so, for example, driving from work over the hill on Highway 17 was just a real mess. And so people would come to the class for a while, and then they go like, oh, I just don't want to do that commute. Or if you had a class at the very beginning of the day, like one that started at 9 in the morning or 8 in the morning, and the people would have to commute to get here. You start out with a class that was mostly in person, some remote, and then by the end of the class, it'd be mostly remote, some in class. So it would change over time. And my policy is that you didn't have to pick, even though we had to have 2 section numbers that you would register for, it didn't really matter. It was all the same class. So I told people you could, at any point in time, if you weren't feeling well, or you were traveling, you were on the road, don't come to class, use Confer or use Zoom. And if you just, if you wanted to come in because you felt like you could pay attention better when you were in the class, do it. But you could change it up. You could do it the whole thing remote, the whole thing in class, or every week you could change your mind and do something different. That's how I ran it.
Well, that seems
Then
like
of course, if you missed a class, you could watch the video too.
so when you have a population that's working adults and older adults and a mix of younger students, that seems like a great way to serve everyone's needs. Did you ever need to advise any of the students fresh out of high school, hey, I think you should come in, or would benefit you from coming in, or did they do a good job self-selecting the method of learning?
It all depends. It was for an online course, you do need to be more disciplined, but that level of discipline that a person has seems to be whether they're retired or working or right or still in high school. There's the same amount of variability. I mean, you can have a very disciplined person who's working, but they're working 80 hours a week,
right,
and they're going to have very little time to spend on the class. So it's you could it's always a mix. It's always a mix. So I just let people decide, and then if I felt that someone was falling behind, I would encourage them to come to the class, because then I could spend some time with them before and after the class.
I see.
And sometimes that one-on-one time where you bond a little bit better than you can online. Mm-hmm. I always felt that once you bonded a little bit more with the student by having one-on-one conversations, then that was always a motivator, because once you talk to somebody and get to know them, I think you put your effort into the course always increases. There's one other thing too, is yes. I forgot about this one, but because a 3-hour class or a 4-hour class once a week, watching a video could be really hard. I tried to make it so that you could just use these PowerPoints and go through slide by slide, look at the lesson, see what it was, the skill that you were learning, and then practice it. So we had lots of resources that the students could use from home to practice their skills. And so I made it so that you didn't actually have to watch the video unless you wanted to. You could have the video running, but you could also just take the slides like a self-paced course and just kind of walk your way through it. And by the time you got to the end, you would have everything. You would see everything that was covered in the lesson that you may have missed or couldn't attend because you were working. And you would have some hands-on practice, learning how to do it.
And the beauty of designing that way is that you're designing one set of materials that works for different scenarios.
Exactly. And I only had one set of materials. That would be it. It would be these PowerPoint slides. And the tests too. The tests they were quite elaborate tests, because and the test would work for whether you're in class or if you were remote. But because I was in the computer, the CIS department, we had access to a lot of computers, and we could provide a lot of computers to our students. And you could access these computers remotely from anywhere on the planet over the internet. And so the tests I would make would be, they were elaborate tests. I never liked multiple choice tests. I always felt like you didn't spend that much time. Well, it depended on the test, but I never really liked multiple choice tests. I liked tests where you actually had to do something. So I made tests where they actually had to complete tasks. When they completed the task, I'd ask them a question about the task, and that would be their answer. And when you do tests like that, you can do all sorts of cool things. Like I'd have a practice test that I'd make available a week before the real test. Pretty soon, students learned that the questions on the real test were identical to the questions on the practice test. But they also quickly learned that the answers to the questions on their practice test were no longer correct to the same questions on the real test. And some of them learned that the correct answer to a question on either test for themselves was not a correct answer for another classmate. Now you can't do that with some classes, but with a computer class, you can do that. So for example, instead of asking, how do you determine the permissions on a file, or how do you change the permissions on a file, what you do is you make a whole bunch of different files, one for each person. You ask each person to set a different set of permissions on them, and then you check to see that they actually did it. Or you say, you take their name and you bury it in a file, and you spread everybody, you put the person's name in a different file, and you spread those files out all over a system, and you want them to use like the find commands and the search commands and say, okay, find a file in this branch of the tree that has your name in it. And then your answer will be the absolute path name of that file. Everybody will have a different absolute path name. It'll be different than the practice test. So, but it'll be the exact same question. So you can do that kind of stuff when you're teaching a computer course that you can't always do with the other courses.
The bigger takeaway might be that their practice exactly matched their assessment. Even though the answers weren't the same, there were no surprise questions or trick questions on the test. They were able to practice in class and then practice on a practice test and then be tested all in the same way.
That's right. That's right.
That's it.
And they learned too that, well, I found that a lot of my students, I'd say a fair proportion of them, would be stressed out by tests, especially a time test. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, for the certifications that you learn, you have to get in the IT business, they're all time tests. And so the practice test was one way to help them get through that, to learn something and remove some of the stress. And then, but there were some folks that would still be stressed by that. And so they could always use I remember I was telling you about, I had lots of extra credit.
Yes. So
for people who would just get totally stressed out, even with a practice test, even though they knew what the questions were I had 3 tests, each worth 30 points. The final exam was just the 3rd test. That was also worth 30 points. And I also had 90 points of extra credit. So for people who just totally got stressed on tests, they could just do extra credit. So I tried to take all the stress out of it. But I encouraged them to work as hard as they could on the test, because in a real life situation in the IT biz, a lot of times you're under time pressure. You know, like the website is down. We got to get this thing fixed. We're losing sales when you can get this fixed, you know, or a certification test, you know, and the clock is just ticking away, you know, and the seconds are going by. So it's good practice for them to practice it. But I'd still let them show that they knew this stuff via other methods.
And how did you design the extra credit so it didn't feel like a gimme at the end?
I had, throughout the course, I'd have little activities. So for example, when we're teaching them how to use SSH, this is secure shell. It's a way that you can log on to a remote computer. We'd talk about it in class, we'd have a lab, but then I'd have a little extra credit activity. If you were on the forum, you'd see I'd make a post, extra credit today. Anybody who can get to this website and follow the instructions will get 3 points of extra credit. And so they would click on the link in the forum post. They go to the website. The website would say, you need to SSH into 2 computers. So you SSH into 1 computer, and you SSH from there into the 2nd computer. And then once you got to that other computer, there was a webcam watching an LED display, and your name would appear on the LED display. So you had to take a screenshot of that and send it to me for 3 points. So it'd be fun, but they would really learn SSH to do it. So I'd do those kind of things. I'd have extra credit labs. So each lab was worth 30 points, same as the test. And there'd be just additional labs they could do for 30 points. So there's lots of different things like that. Big extra credits, little extra credits.
So the extra credits weren't free points. They were all valuable learning experiences and meaningful.
Oh, absolutely.
For the students' experience.
And sometimes they might even be more extensive. You know, every point is the same. A point on the final exam is the same as a point extra credit, which is the same as a point you get when you're making a 4-point forum post. But some points were easier to get than others.
Uh-huh.
So those quiz points, you know, to the first minute quiz, you couldn't get any easier. Now all you had to do was be there on time. Because when you have the questions a week in advance, and you can on the forum ask everybody, hey, this is what I think the answers are to next week's quiz, and they can argue about what are the right answers, and then someone say, well, look, the answers are right in Rich's slides. Look, it's right on page 14 that he covered what the answer was. So it's got to be the right answer. And so those were the easy ones, and then some of them would be much more extensive. So I might throw in just a little brain teaser one. We go through a kind of a complex subject on how processes work. And I'd say, okay, for 2 points, why does this happen? And email me the answer before our next class. And that would take, those 2 points would be a lot more work than other points. But they could make them up, and they knew which ones were easy to get, and they would do those too.
So
and some of them, like your friend, he would just do all of them. Regardless,
yeah.
I want to do everything.
Yeah.
So I had students that would do that too. They didn't even need the extra credit. They just do it all, but.
Yes. So it sounds like a combination of easy wins, harder wins, multiple pathways to success in a setting that would fit everyone's lifestyle and life circumstances.
Yeah, try as best as possible. There's always situations too where family emergencies, you know, could be covered really well by extra credit. So if I can't come to class, a relative has passed away, got a funeral, say, oh, don't sweat it, just do the extra credit. Don't do the, just forget this lab, do the extra credit instead. But but there could be things too where even that wouldn't work, but most of the time it would cover 90% of the things. If you had a job though that was 100 hours a week for the whole term, it was really hard for those folks.
Right. So those were probably the asynchronous completion folks who would just jump in and do the work whenever they had a few minutes to spare.
Yeah, there's some that were just so busy, you know, they'd come. I had a no late work policy, and so to get the points on something, you'd have to do it when it was due. You had a week for everything to get it done. But some of the folks I remember who were working so hard, they'd wait until like 10 minutes before it was due. They'd crank and crank and crank. They'd get partial credit for it, but you know, I could tell that their lives were completely tied up with other things.
Right.
But of course, they wanted to learn this stuff because it would help them advance on their job or get a promotion or get a new job. And so they would put in as much time as they could. But I had some students who do that and they say, you know what, I'm just going to take it next term.
And they just realized it was too much.
I'll do a withdrawal and I'll just come back next term because I won't be so busy next time. This project will be done and I can spend more time on it.
So what advice would you have for teachers who are new to online teaching or want to consider teaching with this method that you've developed? What advice could you give them?
Well, it's really helpful to take some online courses yourself. And you know, there's a lot you can take, Coursera, and you're probably your own local colleges, and it really helps. You know, I think a lot of teaching well online is the same things you do teaching in, you know, face-to-face, the kind of things that you do, and you have to tune them for online, but a lot of them are the same kind of things. That personal bond you build up with people so that they can talk to you. That doesn't change whether it's online or if it's face to face. But if I was starting, I would definitely try to, if your college will let you, do the synchronous first. Some colleges I know don't want to do that. They want you to they want you to jump right into asynchronous, and you basically have to structure a course with videos and exercises that are meant to be completely self-paced. Those are those don't really work well, you know, as dual purpose materials. They work really well for asynchronous, but it's hard to do it well to keep people from drifting off. So if you can do it synchronous, I would do that. If you have conferences in our state, in California, we have the online teaching conference every year. It's down in Southern California, and it's usually 2 or 3 days of like 50-minute sessions where people come and talk about what they're doing using Zoom or Confer or different tools. If you have those in Colorado, you definitely should sign up for it. And usually your college will fund those things too. And then work with Denise and work with your staff. There's each college right now is building up staff to help teachers become online teachers. And it's a little bit different with each college, but so I would take classes, I take online courses so you can kind of see yourself what works and what drives you nuts. And of course you got to realize that what drives you nuts might make someone else happy. I learned that one. You know, what I like may not be what other people like. And you just have to tune it. In Colorado, do you have a choice between synchronous and asynchronous?
Yes. So at our campus, our courses will be either fully online or a hybrid model that's a mix of online and face-to-face. So Zoom will be utilized, as well as some learning that's housed inside Blackboard for students.
That's great. And then what I would do too is if you're doing that, use the students in the classroom to help you with the students that are remote. So for example, if you're looking at a classroom and then the chat window over here is this little tiny box, but I have in front of me a whole classroom, but the real estate for the little chat box is really, really small. And a question might come up. You might be talking about something and someone will ask a question and you might miss it. Okay. Or it might scroll off. So if you need to train your students in the classroom, they need to be on, if you use Zoom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they all need to be on Zoom too. And the minute they see a question coming up in the chat window that the instructor missed, they say, "Oh, Rich, someone just had a question on relative paths." And, "Oh, sorry, let me catch that." Okay. And then the most important one is if you're doing the recordings for your students that can't attend, this is what you have your students in the classroom do. You give them extra credit or you give them permission to jump up and down and scream. But if you ever start teaching the course and you forgot to hit the record button, you have your students remind you and say, "Rich, I don't think you're recording this." Because I tell them what would happen if I forgot to record a 3-hour class. I'd have to go home and do it all over again without anybody in front of me. So you can use those students to help you. And then the other thing too is depending on your audio setup in the room, ideally you want the people in the room to be able to hear what the people remotely are saying. And you want the people who are remote to hear what the students in the classroom are saying. So you might have to mess around with microphones or conference phones or to get that to the point where when someone in the classroom, physical classroom, asks a question, you don't have to repeat it for the people online. It's much better if everybody can hear everybody. You have to play around with that, and usually you have your, it's usually a matter of placing microphones, or I used the star phone for a while. You have to try different things.
We have rooms with drop mics coming out of the ceiling.
Yeah, those are ideal if you can get a room like that. But the worst thing possible is for the people remote to feel like they're second-class citizens. You know,
right.
That I can't hear what half the people are saying. You know, that sounds like a question that I would want to ask, but I don't even know what the person said. And you can't always count on the instructor to remember to repeat every single thing. And you don't want to have to repeat every single thing. It's much more productive if everybody can hear everybody.
Yes, definitely.
So that's something to look out for too when you're just starting. So a lot of times what you're going to want to do is just pause every once in a while, just do a little feedback session from your remote folks. Is how's it going? Can you hear what's being asked? Am I answering your questions as they come up? And so forth.
That's a really important point. Something else I just thought of, you might even have students type a question in or type some dialogue in as the class is going. If the room's not fully mic'd up and it's hard to hear, you could have a student typing in the chat box, kind of making sure that everyone could hear or know what's going on the other end, on the Zoom end.
And that reminds me of another thing too, is that you want to use the Zoom tools or WebEx tools or Confer tools as much as possible. So for example, when I do an activity, I'd say, okay, there is a file on this system that's such and such and such and such. I want everybody to find it, okay? And then put in the chat window the absolute path of the file. And you'd see answers starting to go in the chat window. And then someone would say, no, wait, I'm getting it. I found it somewhere else. No, that can't be right. I tried that. It's not there. So if you use the tools that are, this is why you want everybody on Zoom. You can't have some people on Zoom and some people not on Zoom. But if you use those as part of your activities, you can also do things like with the pointers and stuff. You can say, I might have a set of questions on one side and a set of answers on the other side. And I had the class draw lines from the question to the correct answer.
Using the annotation
believe
tools.
How it self-corrects. You get wrong answers, and all of a sudden people go, wait a minute, why is everybody saying that that's the answer to this, and I'm the only one that, oh, I see why. You erase yours. Wow. If you use those tools, it can make it more fun. And you don't want your online class to be just like a common lecture class. You want to mix it up with using some of these tools.
The Zoom tools are fabulous. The breakout rooms that allow you to place students in groups. If everyone's logged into Zoom, then you could have your remote students and your face-to-face students in a group together.
Yes.
And so even though they're not together physically, they can be collaborating together, working together on problems in the same space. So those are great tools to leverage.
And if you do that too, a way to get students, because usually when you get students who don't know each other into a breakout room, it's this absolute deadpan silence. And so one thing you should do is let them bring up a whiteboard and mark it up, building a picture of their room where they can put anything they want on the wall. And then you go visit the different rooms. And that's like an icebreaker for those breakout rooms. Because a lot of times you put people who don't know each other into a virtual room,
right,
that there is just dead silence. This is like, I don't know who these people are. I don't want to say anything that makes me look like I don't know anything.
Right.
And so
right.
you have them dress up their room or whatever, and then you give them some simple task to get started.
And the mugshot wall that you put up, that's a good, nice community building tool also. Can you talk a little bit more about that and maybe show us one?
What I did there, let me see here. Let me share. Let me go to so what I did was for every class, we'd start out with, notice how I have notes to myself?
Yes.
Start recording. Check audio and video. Make sure people can hear you. I'd say, Cody, can you hear me? What 1 to 10? How's my audio today? Nate, what's my audio? 1 to 10. Tanisha, what can you hear me? And then before we even get started, so you got to do that.
And you're calling students by names.
Oh yeah. You definitely get to know them by name. So you would. In fact, that's another part of the synchronous thing is you need to be talking with them, and I never put them on the spot, but I usually would ask them for, what do you think about that, that kind of stuff, where any answer is okay. But this is the way I'd start the class. So what they could do is if they wanted 3 points extra credit, they could send me their picture, and I'd put their picture up here, and you could see. So like Mark was never, very rarely in the class. Tanisha would always be coming to class. But this way people could see the other people in the room. And as the course would go on, more and more pictures would come in. But it was a great way. And this is what we used at HP after we took this training from Jackie Costner. She said this is a great way for remote teams to work together. So you always start out with pictures of everybody on your team. And I just transferred it from teams to students, as a way to get the group more gelled together. Yeah, I would, I'm sure everybody does this naturally too, is we don't have to take roll every time. We kind of go like, hey, this is college. This is, if you want to learn this stuff, you need to come. But I would call roll until I learned everybody's name. It was always helpful to call roll and say the person's name until I learned. And then once you know everybody's name, it's much easier to just say, hey, Mark, hey, Lucky, and right in the middle of the class, talk to the person, even though they might be remote.
Thank you for sharing that. You have a lot going on here, and at the same time, it's a very simplistic design with everything designed in one method that works for students attending in different ways, and they have that flexibility. The extra credit system of tasks is almost like a gamification of your course, where they can select activities to earn up a certain number of points to get the grade that they want to get. So I see that there's multiple pathways to success. There's ways for learners to build community, and there's ways for learners to make attending class work with their life week by week. And as we know, like, our world is changing week by week right now. So this is a fabulous design model. And I want to thank you so much for your time and sharing your wonderful course design with us and your experiences.
Well, you're welcome. Good luck to everybody teaching online. We have a lot of online teachers now.
We do. We do. Thank you.
You betcha.